The morning Sarah Whitmore woke to find her legs would never move again, she decided her life as a woman worth loving had ended at 22 years old. The stagecoach accident outside of Denver, Colorado territory in the summer of 1876 had stolen more than her ability to walk. It had stolen her future, her dreams, and every hope she had carried west from Philadelphia. The doctors at the makeshift hospital in town had been blunt with their prognosis. The damage to her spine was permanent. She would never stand on her own 2 feet again, never dance, never run through a meadow, never walk down an aisle in a white dress. Her sister Margaret had cried for 3 days straight, but Sarah had only stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her new reality settle over her like a burial shroud. 6 months later, Sarah sat in the wooden wheelchair her brother-in-law Thomas had built for her, watching through the window of their small house on the outskirts of town, as life continued without her participation. Margaret meant well, fussing over her constantly, but Sarah could see the strain in her sister's eyes. Thomas worked long hours at the lumber mill, and Margaret was pregnant with their second child. They had taken Sarah in without question after the accident, but she knew she was a burden. The guilt ate at her daily, gnawing at whatever fragments of hope she still possessed. The other women in town treated her with pity, which somehow felt worse than contempt. They would pat her hand and speak in hushed, sympathetic tones about God's mysterious ways. The men looked through her as if she had become invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of their vision. Sarah had accepted this new truth about her existence. She was no longer a woman in their eyes. She was a tragic figure, an object of charity, something broken that could never be fixed. On a cold November morning, everything changed when a mountain man walked into the general store where Sarah sat waiting for Margaret to finish shopping. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad he had to turn slightly to fit through the doorframe. His hair hung past his shoulders in dark waves, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught Sarah's attention, pale blue like glacier ice, scanning the room with an intensity that suggested he missed nothing. His arms strained against the worn fabric of his shirt, muscles clearly defined even through the layers of clothing he wore against the autumn chill. Everything about him spoke of raw strength and power, from the way he moved with deliberate confidence to the casual manner in which he hefted a 50-pound sack of flour onto his shoulder as if it weighed nothing at all. Those ice-blue eyes landed on Sarah, and unlike every other man in town, he did not look away. He did not look through her. He looked at her, really looked, and Sarah felt something stir in her chest that she thought had died in that stagecoach wreck. "Madam," he said, nodding to her with genuine respect, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones. Sarah managed a small nod in return, suddenly aware of how her heart was racing. The mountain man turned back to his business with the shopkeeper, but Sarah could not stop watching him. He moved with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so large, each motion purposeful and controlled. She noticed the way his hands handled items carefully, despite their size. Those were hands that knew both strength and gentleness. "That's Caleb Stone," Margaret whispered when she returned, her arms full of supplies. "Lives up in the mountains, only comes to town every few weeks for provisions. They say he's been up there alone for 5 years, ever since he came back from the war." Sarah said nothing, but she filed the name away in her memory. Caleb Stone. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself thinking about the mountain man far more than was reasonable. She told herself it was foolish, that she had no business entertaining romantic thoughts about anyone, least of all a solitary man who clearly preferred his own company. But she could not forget the way he had looked at her, as if she were simply a woman, not a pitiable creature in a wheelchair. When he appeared in town again in early December, Sarah was once more at the general store. This time, Caleb approached her directly. "Pardon me, madam," he said, and Sarah noticed that his voice, while deep and rough, held a cultured quality that surprised her. "I couldn't help but notice your chair. Mind if I take a look at the construction?" Sarah blinked in surprise. "I suppose not." Caleb knelt down, bringing his eyes level with hers, and Sarah realized this was deliberate, a choice to meet her as an equal rather than tower over her. He examined the wheelchair with careful attention, running his large hands over the wood and wheels. "Your brother-in-law built this?" he asked. "Yes. Thomas did his best, but he's not a carpenter by trade. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. It's decent work, but the wheels are too small for anything but smooth floors, and there's no support for your back on longer sits. He looked up at her, and Sarah felt pinned by the intelligence in those pale eyes. Does your back hurt after an hour or so? Sarah was so startled by the directness of the question that she answered honestly. Yes, quite badly actually. Thought so. Caleb stood and Sarah had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I could build you something better. Something that would let you move around easier, go over rough ground. Wouldn't be quick work, but I reckon I could have it done by spring. Sarah's throat tightened. I couldn't possibly ask you to do that. I have no way to pay you. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a softening around his eyes. Didn't ask for payment, asked if you wanted a better chair. But why would you? Sarah's voice came out smaller than she intended. You don't even know me. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, as if choosing his words carefully. I know what it's like to feel trapped in a body that won't do what you need it to do. And I know what it's like when people look at you and only see what's wrong, not what's still there. He paused. Your name's Sarah, isn't it? I'm Caleb. I know, Sarah said, then felt her cheeks warm. I mean, my sister told me. The corner of Caleb's mouth quirked up in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Well then, Sarah, would you like me to build you a better chair or not? Sarah knew she should refuse. She should not accept such a generous offer from a stranger. She should not encourage any connection that might lead her foolish heart to hope for things that could never be. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, yes. Yes, I would like that very much. Good. Caleb nodded decisively. I'll need to take some measurements, figure out what will work best. Would it be all right if I came by your house sometime this week? I'm staying with my sister and her husband, the house at the end of Maple Street, the one with the blue door. I'll find it. Caleb touched the brim of his hat in farewell. Good day, Miss Sarah. After he left, Margaret rushed over, her eyes wide. Sarah, what was that about? What did Caleb Stone want with you? He's going to build me a new wheelchair, Sarah said, still somewhat dazed by the entire interaction. Margaret's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and something that looked almost like hope. That's very kind of him. Very kind indeed. That evening, over dinner, Thomas seemed less enthusiastic about the arrangement. I don't know much about Caleb Stone, he admitted, cutting into his venison. He keeps to himself, doesn't cause trouble, but there are rumors. What kind of rumors? Sarah asked, trying to keep her tone casual. That he was an officer in the war, saw terrible things, that something happened to make him leave civilization behind. Some folks say he's dangerous. He didn't seem dangerous, Sarah said quietly. He seemed kind. Margaret reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. I think it's wonderful that he wants to help. And honestly, Thomas, your chair, bless your heart for building it, but it's not very comfortable for Sarah. Thomas had the grace to look sheepish. I know, I did my best, but carpentry isn't my skill. If Stone can build something better, I've got no pride to wound over it. 2 days later, Caleb arrived at their door in the afternoon. He carried a leather satchel and a notebook, and he spent over an hour taking careful measurements of Sarah, the current wheelchair, and the doorways of the house. He asked detailed questions about her daily routine, what she needed to reach, where she spent most of her time. Do you ever leave the house? He asked, his pencil poised over his notebook. Sarah felt shame color her cheeks. Not often. The chair doesn't handle the streets well, especially when it rains and everything turns to mud. Caleb wrote something down. That's going to change. I'm thinking wheels like a small wagon with good suspension. You'll be able to go wherever you want. Truly. Sarah could not keep the longing from her voice. Caleb looked at her with those penetrating blue eyes. Truly. You shouldn't be trapped inside just because your legs don't work. The rest of you works just fine. It was such a simple statement, but it struck Sarah with the force of revelation. The rest of her did work just fine. Her mind, her hands, her voice, her heart, all of these remained whole. She had been so focused on what she had lost that she had forgotten what remained. Thank you, she whispered. Caleb nodded and went back to his measurements. Before he left, he surprised Sarah by asking, Do you read? Yes, very much. It's one of the few pleasures I have left. What do you like? Poetry mostly. Novels when I can get them. My sister brings me books from the lending library. I've got a fair collection up at my cabin. Nothing too fancy, but a good variety. I could bring some down next time I come, if you'd like. Sarah felt a smile break across her face, the first genuine smile she had worn in months. I would like that enormously. Over the winter months, Caleb became a regular visitor to the house on Maple Street. He came every week or so, always bringing books for Sarah and updates on the progress of the wheelchair. He worked on it in his cabin up in the mountains, he explained, where he had a proper workshop. Sometimes he would sketch designs for her, showing her the improvements he was planning: the larger wheels with rubber treading, the padded seat and back support, the clever folding mechanism that would make it easier to transport. But more than the wheelchair, Sarah found herself looking forward to their conversations. Caleb was remarkably well-read for a mountain hermit, and they would discuss literature and philosophy for hours. He had been to college before the war, he told her, studying engineering. He had commanded a company of soldiers, seen battles that still haunted his dreams, and watched too many good men die for causes that seemed less clear with each passing year. "Is that why you live alone?" Sarah asked one snowy afternoon. They were sitting in the small parlor, Margaret having discreetly found reasons to be elsewhere. "Because of the war." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Partly. War changes you, makes it hard to be around people who don't understand. But there was more to it." He glanced at her, then away. "I was engaged before I left for the war. Susan was her name. Prettiest girl in Boston, or so I thought. I came back different than when I left. Walked with a limp for a while, had nightmares that would wake me screaming. She tried to stand it for about 3 months, then told me she couldn't marry a broken man." Sarah's chest tightened with anger on his behalf. "She was a fool." Caleb's eyes snapped to hers, and she saw surprise there. "You think so?" "I know so. You're not broken, Caleb. You're hurt, and that's different. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you." Something profound shifted in Caleb's expression, a vulnerability breaking through his usual guarded demeanor. "That's pretty much exactly what I think about you," he said quietly. "You're not broken either, Sarah, and any man who can't see past your chair to the remarkable woman sitting in it is a fool who doesn't deserve you." The air between them seemed to crackle with sudden tension. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Then Caleb cleared his throat and stood abruptly. "I should go. Storm's coming in, and I need to get back before the pass gets too deep." "Of course," Sarah managed, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must hear it. At the door, Caleb paused. "Sarah, I want you to know something. These visits, talking with you, it's become the best part of my week, maybe the best part of my life right now." Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, striding out into the snow. Margaret appeared almost instantly. "Sarah, that man is courting you." "Don't be ridiculous," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm not being ridiculous. I'm being observant. He looks at you like you hung the moon." Margaret sat down beside her sister. "How do you feel about him?" Sarah closed her eyes. "It doesn't matter how I feel. Margaret, I can't even walk. I can't run a household properly, can't bear children safely, can't be a real wife to anyone. It would be cruel to encourage his attention." "That's nonsense, and you know it," Margaret said firmly. "You're one of the smartest, kindest, most capable women I know. Any man would be lucky to have you. The question is, do you have feelings for Caleb?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked at her sister. "I think I'm falling in love with him," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." Margaret pulled her into a tight embrace. "Love is always terrifying, sweetie, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth pursuing." The weeks that followed were a strange kind of torture. Caleb continued his visits, and the connection between them deepened with each conversation. They discovered shared passions for astronomy and history. Caleb brought her a book on the constellations, and they would spend hours discussing the stars neither of them could see through the winter clouds. He told her about his childhood in Boston, his parents, who had both passed from fever before the war. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her father who had brought them west seeking opportunity before succumbing to pneumonia 2 winters ago. "You've lost a lot," Caleb observed one afternoon. "So have you," Sarah replied. "I suppose we're both familiar with grief then." Caleb reached out and very gently took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond the clinical necessity of measurements, and Sarah felt the warmth of his palm against hers like a brand. "But I'm starting to think maybe we're also familiar with hope." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his so large and rough, hers small and smooth. "Caleb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Always. Why are you doing this? And please don't tell me it's just kindness. I need to know the truth." Caleb's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "The truth is that from the moment I saw you in that store, I couldn't get you out of my mind. The truth is that I've been alone for 5 years because I thought I was better off that way. But knowing you has shown me I was just hiding. The truth is that I look forward to coming to town now, when I used to dread it. And the truth is that I'm building you this chair because I want you to have freedom and mobility, but also because it gives me an excuse to keep seeing you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Caleb, I can't walk. I will never walk again. I can't be the kind of wife you deserve." "And what kind of wife is that?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle but firm. "One who can stand beside you, who can help with physical work, who can—" Sarah broke off, her cheeks flushing. "Who can what, Sarah?" Caleb moved his chair closer until their knees were nearly touching. "Who can share my bed? Because I've thought about that, probably more than is proper. And I want you to know something. I don't care that you can't walk. I care that you make me laugh. I care that you're the smartest person I've ever talked to. I care that when you smile at me, it's like the sun coming out. I care that you see me, really see me, not the broken soldier, but the man underneath." "But there are practical considerations," Sarah protested, even as her heart soared at his words. "I would need help with so many things. I couldn't possibly manage a household in the mountains." "Then we'll figure it out together," Caleb said. "Sarah, I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are. And I'm telling you that who you are is everything I want." "You're sure?" Sarah's voice trembled. "You're absolutely sure?" Instead of answering with words, Caleb leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and tentative at first, a question rather than a demand. Sarah responded without thinking, her hands coming up to rest against his broad chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the realness of him. The kiss deepened, and Sarah felt 5 months of loneliness and longing pour out of her into this connection with this impossible, wonderful man. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sure," he said. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." "I love you," Sarah whispered. "I think I've loved you since you first looked at me like I was a person instead of a problem." "I love you too," Caleb said. "And Sarah, you're not a problem. You're the solution I didn't know I was looking for." When Margaret found them some time later, they were still sitting close together, holding hands and talking quietly. She took one look at them and smiled. "I'll put on tea," was all she said. That evening, Caleb formally asked Thomas for permission to court Sarah. Thomas, perhaps recognizing the inevitability of the situation and the genuine affection between them, gave his blessing readily. "But I'll warn you, Stone," Thomas said, trying for stern but not quite managing it. "You hurt her, and you'll answer to me." Caleb, who had at least 4 inches and 50 pounds of muscle on Thomas, nodded solemnly. "If I hurt her, I'll deserve whatever you dish out. But I won't. I'd sooner cut off my own arm." Over the next few weeks, Caleb's courtship of Sarah became the talk of the town. The gossips didn't know what to make of it. Some thought it romantic, others thought it strange. A few had the audacity to suggest that Caleb was taking advantage of Sarah's situation. That particular rumor died a quick death after Sarah herself, in a rare outing to the general store, informed Mrs. Henderson in no uncertain terms that she was a grown woman capable of making her own decisions, and if Mrs. Henderson had any further opinions on the matter, she could keep them to herself. Caleb, when Sarah told him about the incident, laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. "I wish I could have seen her face," he said. "She looked like she had bitten into a lemon," Sarah said with satisfaction. As winter began to loosen its grip and early spring arrived, Caleb announced that the wheelchair was nearly complete. "Another week or two," he told Sarah. "I want to make sure everything is perfect." But he also had another question to ask. They were alone in the parlor again, one of the increasingly common occurrences that Margaret facilitated with shameless enthusiasm. "Sarah, I want to show you my home, my cabin in the mountains. I want you to see where I live, and I want you to tell me honestly if you could see yourself there." Sarah's heart raced. "Is this your way of asking me to marry you?" "That depends on your answer," Caleb said, his pale eyes intense. "I won't ask you to marry me until you've seen what that life would be like. It's isolated, Sarah. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Town is a 2-hour ride. In winter we might be snowed in for weeks at a time. It's not an easy life, and I won't trap you into something you'll come to resent." "When can we go?" Sarah asked. "The chair should be done next week. Weather's warming up, so the trails will be passable. We'll make it a day trip. Bring your sister and Thomas if that makes you more comfortable." "Just you and me," Sarah said firmly. "If we're going to be married, I trust you to be alone with you." Caleb's expression softened. "I'll take good care of you. You have my word." The following week, Caleb arrived with a large wagon, and in the back was the most beautiful wheelchair Sarah had ever seen. It was crafted from smooth, polished wood with brass fittings. The wheels were indeed larger, with thick rubber treads and a suspension system that looked like it belonged on a fine carriage. The seat and back were padded with soft leather, and there were armrests at just the right height. But what truly amazed Sarah were all the small, thoughtful details: a basket attached to the side for carrying things, a folding lap desk so she could write or read comfortably, even a small umbrella holder. "Caleb," she breathed, "it's magnificent." "Let's see if it works," he said, and Sarah could hear the nervousness in his voice. He wanted so badly for her to love it. Caleb lifted her from her old chair with an ease that still amazed her, cradling her against his chest for a moment before gently settling her into the new wheelchair. The difference was immediate. The seat supported her perfectly, the padding relieving pressure points that had ached constantly in the old chair. The armrests were positioned so her shoulders could relax instead of hunching. "How does it feel?" Caleb asked anxiously. "Like I'm sitting on a cloud," Sarah said honestly. "Caleb, this is incredible. How can I ever thank you?" "Marry me," he said impulsively. "Not right now, but soon. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life building you things and making you happy." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Ask me again after I've seen your cabin, but I suspect my answer will be yes." The wheels did indeed work beautifully, rolling smoothly over the wooden floors and even handling the transition to the outside with only a small bump. Thomas had built a ramp for the porch steps weeks ago, and the new chair descended it without trouble. "Ready to see what this beauty can really do?" Caleb asked. The next morning they set out for the mountains. Caleb had outfitted his wagon with a special lift system using ropes and pulleys that allowed him to raise Sarah, chair and all, into the wagon bed. He had created a secure platform there where the chair could be locked in place, and he had even installed a canopy overhead in case of rain. "You've thought of everything," Sarah marveled. "I tried," Caleb said, climbing onto the driver's seat. "Tell me if you're uncomfortable at any point and we'll stop." The journey into the mountains took about 3 hours, following winding trails that climbed steadily upward. The views were spectacular dense pine forests, rushing streams still full with snowmelt, and distant peaks still capped with white. Caleb pointed out landmarks and wildlife, his deep voice carrying easily over the sound of the wagon wheels and horse hooves. When they finally arrived at his cabin, Sarah gasped. She had been expecting something crude and rough, but Caleb's home was a beautiful log structure nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. It was larger than she had anticipated, with a wide front porch and multiple windows that would let in plenty of light. "I built it myself," Caleb said, bringing the wagon to a stop. "Took me nearly a year, but I wanted it done right." He used his pulley system to lower Sarah to the ground, and she was delighted to discover that the path to the cabin was hard-packed dirt, smooth enough for her wheels to handle easily. Caleb had even built a ramp up to the porch. "Did you add that recently?" she asked, indicating the ramp. "Maybe," Caleb said, looking a bit sheepish. "I wanted you to be able to access the house if you came to visit. Or, if you decided to live here." The inside of the cabin was even more impressive than the outside. It was open and spacious, with wide doorways that her chair could easily pass through. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. Bookshelves lined another wall, packed with volumes. There were 2 bedrooms, one of which Caleb had clearly been using for storage, and a large workroom where he did his carpentry. "The doorways are all wider than standard," Caleb explained as he pushed her through the space. "And see here, the kitchen counter has sections at different heights. I thought you might like to cook sometimes, so I made sure there were areas you could reach from your chair." Sarah looked around at all the modifications, all the careful thought that had gone into making this space accessible to her, and felt tears start to fall. "You built this thinking of me?" "I rebuilt parts of it thinking of you," Caleb corrected, kneeling beside her chair. "Sarah, what's wrong? Do you hate it?" "I love it," she said, wiping at her tears. "Caleb, I love it so much, and I love you." "Yes." "Yes?" Caleb looked confused. "Yes, I'll marry you. I don't need to think about it anymore. Yes, 1,000 times yes." The smile that broke across Caleb's face was like sunrise. He pulled her from the chair and into his lap as he sat on the floor, holding her close and kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. "I promise I'll take care of you," he murmured against her hair. "I promise I'll build you anything you need, take you anywhere you want to go. I promise I'll never make you feel less than the amazing woman you are." "And I promise to be your partner in all things," Sarah said. "I promise to make this house a home, to stand beside you even if I have to do it sitting down. I promise to love you with everything I have." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in town. Sarah wore a dress of pale blue silk that Margaret had helped her sew, and Caleb wore a new suit that looked almost comically formal on his large frame. But when he saw Sarah being wheeled down the aisle by Thomas, his eyes filled with tears of joy. The minister, who had known Caleb for years, smiled throughout the ceremony. "I have known Caleb Stone since he first came to this territory," he said in his homily. "I have watched him carry the weight of war and loss on his shoulders, and I have watched Sarah Whitmore face trials that would break lesser souls. But today, I see 2 people who have found in each other not just love, but redemption. They remind us that wholeness is not about the body, but about the heart." When Caleb kissed his bride, half the congregation wiped away tears, and the other half cheered. The wedding celebration was held at Margaret and Thomas's house, with neighbors bringing food and well wishes. Even Mrs. Henderson came, though she had the grace to look embarrassed when Sarah greeted her warmly. Caleb never left Sarah's side, his hand constantly seeking hers, his eyes following her every movement as if he could not quite believe his fortune. As the sun began to set, Caleb lifted Sarah into his specially modified wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers, and they set off for the cabin in the mountains. Their cabin, their home. That first night as husband and wife, Caleb carried Sarah over the threshold and then paused in the middle of the main room. "I want to make sure you're comfortable," he said, his voice rough with nerves and desire. "I want this to be good for you." Sarah reached up and pulled him down for a kiss. "Stop worrying," she whispered. "I trust you completely." What followed was a night of discovery and tenderness. Caleb treated Sarah like she was made of precious glass, learning what brought her pleasure, adjusting to accommodate her needs. Sarah, for her part, found freedom in his touch, in the way he worshipped her body without treating it as broken. They laughed and fumbled and finally found their rhythm, and when Sarah fell asleep in Caleb's arms hours later, she felt truly whole for the first time since the accident. Life in the mountains proved to be everything Sarah had hoped for and more. Caleb had been right about the isolation, but Sarah found she preferred it to the pitying looks and whispered gossip of town. Here, she was simply Caleb's wife, and she threw herself into that role with enthusiasm. She discovered that she could do far more than she had believed possible. With her new chair and Caleb's thoughtful modifications to the cabin, she could cook, clean, sew, and manage the household. Caleb built her a garden with raised beds at the perfect height for her to tend from her chair, and by summer they had fresh vegetables supplementing the game Caleb hunted. Sarah also discovered a talent for leather work. Caleb taught her the basics, and she found she enjoyed the precise, detailed work. Soon she was making gloves, belts, and other items that Caleb could sell when he went to town for supplies. It gave her a sense of contribution, of partnership. But more than the practical aspects of their life together, Sarah treasured the deep companionship she shared with Caleb. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. Caleb read to her from his collection of books, or she would read to him while he worked on carving projects. They played chess and checkers, debated philosophy and politics, and shared their dreams for the future. Caleb's nightmares from the war did not disappear, but with Sarah beside him, they became less frequent and less intense. When he woke shouting, she would hold him and talk him back to calm, reminding him where he was and who he was with. He told her things he had never told anyone, about the friends he had lost, the orders he had given that haunted him, the weight of responsibility for other men's lives. "You're a good man, Caleb," Sarah told him one night after a particularly bad episode. "The fact that those deaths haunt you proves it. A bad man wouldn't care." "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve this happiness," Caleb admitted. "I survived when so many didn't, and now I have you and this life, and it feels almost wrong to be this content." "You deserve every bit of happiness you can find," Sarah said firmly. "And those men who died, I think they would want you to live fully, to honor their sacrifice by embracing life, not by punishing yourself with loneliness." Caleb pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I ask myself the same question every day," Sarah replied. As autumn arrived and then winter, Sarah and Caleb settled into the rhythms of mountain life. Caleb had been right about the isolation once the heavy snows came. They were effectively cut off from town for weeks at a time. But Sarah found she didn't mind. They had laid in ample supplies, and she actually enjoyed the enforced closeness, the way they relied entirely on each other. Caleb taught her to shoot, positioning targets so she could practice from her chair. "Just in case," he said. "I don't expect trouble, but I want to know you can protect yourself if I'm out hunting or something happens to me." Sarah proved to be an excellent shot, and Caleb swore she had better aim than half the soldiers he had commanded. She took pride in this new skill, in the way it made her feel capable and less dependent. Winter also brought long, cozy evenings by the fire. Caleb worked on his carpentry projects while Sarah sewed or read. Sometimes they would simply sit together, Caleb in his chair and Sarah in her wheelchair pulled close beside him, hands linked, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind howl outside. "Do you ever miss town?" Caleb asked one night. "Miss being around other people?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I miss Margaret. I worry about her, especially with the baby. But miss town in general? No. Here I'm not poor Sarah in the wheelchair. I'm just Sarah, your wife. That's all I ever wanted to be." "You're so much more than just my wife," Caleb said. "You're my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. You're the reason I wake up grateful every morning." "Sweet talker," Sarah teased, but she squeezed his hand. "It's not sweet talk if it's true." When spring finally came, melting the snow and reopening the trails, they made their first trip to town since before Christmas. Margaret was heavily pregnant now, due within a few weeks, and Sarah was grateful to see her sister looking healthy and happy. "You look wonderful," Margaret said, studying Sarah carefully. "Mountain life clearly agrees with you." "I'm happy," Sarah said simply. "Happier than I ever thought I could be after the accident." "It shows. You're glowing. And Caleb looks at you like you hung the stars in the sky." Sarah glanced across the general store to where Caleb was talking with Thomas and caught him looking back at her. The love in his eyes was so open, so obvious, that she felt her cheeks warm. "He's a good man," Sarah said. "He's a man who loves you desperately," Margaret corrected. "And you deserve that. You deserve all the happiness in the world." 3 weeks later, a frantic Thomas arrived at the cabin in the middle of the night, his horse lathered and heaving. Margaret had gone into labor, and things were not going well. The doctor was nowhere to be found, probably out at one of the distant ranches, and Margaret was asking for Sarah. Caleb had the wagon hitched and ready in minutes. He drove through the darkness like a man possessed, getting them to town in just over an hour. Sarah arrived to find her sister in serious distress, the baby turned wrong, the midwife unsure what to do. Sarah's mind, sharpened by months of reading medical texts that Caleb had brought her out of curiosity about her own condition, immediately began sorting through options. She gave clear, calm instructions to the midwife, drawing on book knowledge and instinct. It took hours, exhausting, tense hours, but finally Margaret's son entered the world with a loud wail. "You saved them," Thomas said, tears streaming down his face as he held his wife's hand. Margaret was exhausted but smiling, the baby nestled against her chest. "Sarah, you saved them both." "I just remembered what I read," Sarah said, but she felt a deep satisfaction. She had been useful, had contributed something vital. The accident had taken her legs, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and tonight that had made all the difference. On the ride home, as dawn broke over the mountains, Caleb reached back and took Sarah's hand. "You were amazing tonight. Watching you take charge, seeing how capable you are, I've never been more proud of you." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted, "but I couldn't let Margaret down. You didn't. You saved her life, and her baby's life. Sarah, you're a hero." "I'm not a hero, I'm just a woman who reads too much." Caleb laughed. "A woman who reads too much, loves fiercely, shoots straight, and saves lives. I'm the luckiest man alive." That summer, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The realization came with a mixture of joy and terror. She and Caleb had not been trying to prevent pregnancy, but neither had they been actively trying for a child. The thought of becoming a mother while managing her paralysis was daunting. When she told Caleb, his reaction was pure, unbridled joy. He swept her out of her chair and spun her around, laughing and whooping. Then he stopped abruptly. "Wait, should I be doing this? Is it safe? Are you all right?" Sarah laughed at his sudden panic. "I'm fine. And yes, I'm all right. Scared, but all right." "Scared of what?" Caleb set her gently back in her chair, kneeling beside her. "Caleb, I can't even walk. How am I going to chase after a toddler? How am I going to be a proper mother?" "The same way you've been a proper wife and a proper person and everything else you've been since I met you. With intelligence, determination, and courage." Caleb took both her hands in his. "Sarah, you're going to be an amazing mother. Our child will be the luckiest kid in the world to have you. But there are practical concerns. The birth itself could be complicated because of my condition. Then we'll make sure you have the best care available. We'll go to Denver if we need to, find a doctor who specializes in difficult births. Money isn't an issue. I've been saving for years, and between my carpentry work and your leather work, we have more than enough." "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Caleb said seriously, "but it's doable. We'll figure it out, just like we figured out everything else. Together." The pregnancy progressed well, though Sarah found her mobility somewhat reduced by the changes in her body. Caleb, true to his word, began making modifications. He built her a new chair with a wider seat to accommodate her growing belly. He created a bassinet that could attach to her wheelchair so she could move the baby around easily. He even started working on a clever contraption that would allow her to rock a cradle while sitting in her chair. As her belly grew, Sarah felt a mix of wonder and anxiety. She could feel the baby moving inside her, a strange sensation given her lack of feeling in her lower body. The doctor they consulted in Denver was cautiously optimistic. Yes, her paralysis could complicate the birth, but it was far from impossible. Many women with spinal injuries had delivered healthy babies. They would need to be careful, plan for complications, but there was no reason to believe she couldn't do this. Caleb accompanied her to every appointment, his hand clasped firmly in hers, his presence a constant reassurance. He asked questions the doctors found surprisingly informed and intelligent. He took notes, planning for every eventuality. "You're going to be such a good father," Sarah told him on the long ride back from one such appointment. "I'm going to try," Caleb said. "I never had much of an example. My father was cold, distant, but I know what I don't want to be." "You'll be warm and present," Sarah said with confidence. "You'll be exactly what our child needs." As winter approached again and Sarah's due date drew near, Caleb made the difficult decision to move them temporarily to town. He couldn't risk something going wrong and being unable to get Sarah to medical help in time. He rented a small house near the doctor's office and brought Sarah to town in late December. Margaret, now recovered and back to her energetic self with her baby son, helped Sarah prepare for the birth. She brought hand-me-down baby clothes and gave advice on nursing and infant care. Thomas and Caleb worked together to make the rental house as accessible as possible for Sarah. "It won't be for long," Caleb promised when he saw Sarah looking wistfully at the mountains in the distance. "As soon as you and the baby are strong enough, we'll go home." "I know, and it's the right decision. I just miss our cabin." "Me too," Caleb admitted, "but keeping you and our child safe is more important than my preference for solitude." Sarah went into labor on a cold January night in 1878. Caleb held her hand through the long, difficult hours that followed. The doctor was present, as was an experienced midwife, and between them, they navigated the complicated birth. Sarah couldn't push effectively due to her paralysis, and at one point it looked like they might need to use forceps or perform surgery. But Sarah was determined, using her upper body strength and sheer force of will to help deliver her child into the world. When the baby's first cry rang out, Caleb was openly weeping. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, "a healthy baby boy." They named him Daniel Thomas Stone, after Caleb's father and Sarah's brother-in-law. He had Caleb's dark hair and Sarah's nose, and from his first moments he seemed to look at the world with alert curiosity. Caleb held his son with the careful reverence usually reserved for sacred objects, his large hands cradling the tiny baby as if he were made of glass. "He's perfect," Caleb whispered. "Sarah, we made something perfect." "We did," Sarah agreed, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Sarah discovered that nursing was one thing her body could do without complication, and she took fierce joy in being able to provide for her son in this way. Caleb was a devoted father from the start, changing diapers, rocking Daniel when he cried, doing whatever he could to ease Sarah's burden. True to his word, Caleb had created systems that allowed Sarah to care for Daniel largely independently. The bassinet attached to her wheelchair meant she could move him around the house easily. A pulley system let her raise and lower him from the cradle without needing to lift him far. Everything was designed to accommodate her needs while allowing her to be a fully present mother. "You're amazing," Caleb told her one morning, finding her nursing Daniel while simultaneously stitching a leather belt. "How do you do all this?" "The same way anyone does," Sarah said with a tired smile. "One moment at a time, and with a lot of help from an incredible husband." By the time spring arrived, Daniel was 3 months old and thriving. The doctor cleared Sarah to return to the mountains, and Caleb nearly shouted with joy at the news. They packed up the rental house and made the journey home on a beautiful April morning. As the cabin came into view, Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she had missed it, this place that Caleb had built with his own hands, that they had made into a home together. "Welcome home," Caleb said softly, helping her down from the wagon. Life settled into new rhythms as they adjusted to parenthood in the mountains. Daniel proved to be a good baby, healthy and curious. As he grew, Sarah adapted her parenting to her circumstances. When he started crawling, she would follow him around in her chair, always present, even if she couldn't chase him in the traditional sense. Caleb built barriers and gates to keep Daniel safe, and together they created an environment where their son could explore while staying protected. When Daniel took his first steps at 10 months old, Caleb lifted Sarah from her chair so she could be at his level as their son toddled between them. Sarah cried tears of joy, celebrating this milestone she had once feared she would never witness. "Mama," Daniel said clearly one morning when he was 14 months old, and Sarah's heart nearly burst. Caleb continued his carpentry work, now creating toys for Daniel as well as furniture and other items to sell. Sarah's leatherwork business had grown, and she had developed a reputation for quality goods. Between them, they made a comfortable living, more than enough to support their small family. Margaret and Thomas visited when they could, making the journey with their own growing family. The cousins would play together while the adults talked and laughed, and Sarah treasured these connections to her sister. "You've built a good life here," Margaret said during one visit, watching Daniel toddle around the yard under Caleb's watchful eye. "I'm so happy for you, Sarah. When I think about how you were after the accident, how you thought your life was over, and I see you now. It just proves that we never know what the future holds." "I never thought I could be this happy," Sarah admitted. "I never thought any man would want me, let alone someone like Caleb. And now I have this beautiful family, this life I love, and I'm grateful for every single day. Caleb is lucky too, you know. You're an amazing wife and mother." "We're lucky to have found each other," Sarah said, watching as Caleb scooped up Daniel and tossed him in the air, the little boy's laughter ringing out across the clearing. When Daniel was 2 years old, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news came with less fear and more excitement. She knew what to expect now, knew what her body could do. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and when the time came, they returned to town for the birth. Their second son, Jacob William Stone, was born on a warm summer evening in 1880. The birth was easier this time, Sarah's body remembering what to do, and within a few hours, she was holding her second perfect baby boy. Daniel was fascinated by his new brother, always wanting to help, to hold him, to show him his toys. Caleb managed the chaos of 2 small children with patience and humor, and Sarah marveled at how naturally fatherhood came to him. "Remember when you thought you couldn't be a proper wife?" Caleb teased one evening as they sat on the porch, Daniel asleep against Sarah's shoulder while she rocked Jacob's cradle with her foot. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're managing just fine." "I had a good teacher," Sarah said, smiling at him over their sons' heads. As the boys grew, the cabin rang with laughter and noise that had been absent during Caleb's solitary years. Daniel was adventurous and bold, always climbing trees and exploring, while Jacob was more thoughtful and quiet, preferring to sit with books or help his mother with her leather work. Both boys adored their parents and never seemed to notice or care that their mother couldn't walk. To them, she was simply Mama, the person who kissed their hurts, told them stories, taught them their letters, and loved them fiercely. Sarah proved adept at adapting traditional mothering to her circumstances. She couldn't run after the boys, but she could call them back with a firm voice that brooked no disobedience. She couldn't kneel down to their level, but she could pull them into her lap from her chair for cuddles and conversations. She taught them early on that they needed to be mindful of others' needs, and both boys became remarkably considerate and helpful as a result. When Daniel was 5 and Jacob was 3, Sarah began teaching them formally, setting up a small schoolroom in the cabin. She had been an avid student before the accident, and she threw herself into educating her sons with passion. Caleb would join their lessons when his work allowed, and the boys learned reading, arithmetic, history, and science from parents who made learning an adventure. "You're a born teacher," Caleb observed one afternoon, watching as Sarah guided Daniel through a difficult arithmetic problem while simultaneously reading a story to Jacob. "I enjoy it," Sarah admitted. "I always thought I might like to teach before the accident. I suppose in a way, I'm doing it now." As the years passed, Sarah and Caleb's love deepened into something even stronger than the passion of their early days. They knew each other completely, could read each other's moods and thoughts with a glance. They had weathered challenges together, harsh winters, illness in the family, the constant work of maintaining a homestead in the mountains. Through it all, their commitment to each other never wavered. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Sarah by presenting her with a new wagon, this one, larger and more comfortable than the first. "I thought we could take trips," he explained, "show the boys more of the world. I don't want you to feel trapped here, no matter how much we both love this place." They took their first family trip that summer, traveling to Denver so the boys could see a real city. Daniel and Jacob were amazed by the tall buildings, the crowds of people, the trains that thundered past. But after a week, both boys were ready to return to the quiet of the mountains, and Sarah and Caleb laughed at their son's loyalty to home. When Daniel was 10 and Jacob was 8, they welcomed a third addition to their family, a daughter they named Elizabeth Margaret Stone, after Sarah's mother and sister. The boys doted on their little sister, and Caleb was utterly smitten, carrying his daughter everywhere and spoiling her shamelessly. "You're going to turn her into a tyrant," Sarah warned, watching Caleb build an elaborate dollhouse for Elizabeth on her 2nd birthday. "She's my princess," Caleb said unapologetically. "She can have whatever she wants." But despite Caleb's indulgence, Elizabeth grew into a sweet, loving child who adored her mother and wanted to do everything Sarah did. She would sit in Sarah's lap for hours, learning leatherwork, listening to stories, asking endless questions about the world. As the children grew, they began to understand more about their mother's condition and the accident that had caused it. Daniel, at 12, asked her directly one day while they were working in the garden together, "Mama, does it bother you that you can't walk? Do you wish things were different?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sometimes I think about what my life might have been like if the accident hadn't happened. I probably would have married someone in town, lived a more conventional life. But Daniel, I can honestly say I wouldn't change anything. That accident brought me to your father, brought me to this life, brought me to you and your brother and sister. So no, I don't wish things were different." "Papa says you're the strongest person he knows," Daniel said. "Your papa is biased," Sarah said with a smile. "But I think we're all stronger than we know, until we're tested." The years continued to pass in a pattern of seasons and growth. Daniel grew into a young man who looked remarkably like his father, tall and broad-shouldered with the same pale blue eyes. He was interested in engineering and would spend hours with Caleb in the workshop, learning the principles of building and design. Jacob remained quieter and more scholarly, and Sarah was already planning for him to attend university in a few years. Elizabeth, at 8 years old, declared she wanted to be a doctor, inspired by the physician who had helped deliver her and cared for their family over the years. Sarah and Caleb watched their children grow with pride and satisfaction, knowing they had created something beautiful together. The love story that had begun in a general store in 1876, between a woman who thought she was unlovable and a man who had isolated himself from the world, had blossomed into a family and a life rich with meaning. On a warm evening in the spring of 1891, Caleb and Sarah sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The children were inside, arguing good-naturedly about what game to play, their voices carrying through the open windows. 15 years of marriage, 3 children, countless challenges overcome, and Sarah still felt her heart quicken when Caleb reached for her hand. "Do you remember the day we met?" Caleb asked, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "Every detail," Sarah said. "You walked into that store, and you looked at me like I was a person, not a tragedy. I think I started falling in love with you right then." "I knew you were special the moment I saw you," Caleb said. "There was something in your eyes, a strength and intelligence that drew me in. I wanted to know you, wanted to understand what made you who you were. And then you built me a wagon," Sarah said with a smile. "The most elaborate courtship gift in history. I wanted to give you freedom. I wanted to show you that your life didn't have to be limited just because your legs didn't work." Caleb brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "But what I really wanted was to show you that you were worth the effort, worth the time and the work and all the care I could give you." "You've shown me that every single day for 15 years, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given me a life I never dreamed possible. You've made me feel beautiful and capable and loved even on my hardest days." "Because you are beautiful and capable and loved," Caleb said. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Stone. You and these children, this life we've built, it's more than I ever hoped for when I came to these mountains alone and broken." "We healed each other," Sarah said. "You gave me back my belief that I could be loved and desired and useful. And I gave you back your connection to the world, your purpose, your heart." Inside the cabin, Elizabeth called for them, wanting to show them a picture she had drawn. Caleb stood and moved behind Sarah's chair, preparing to push her inside. "One more minute," Sarah said, looking out at the mountains that had become her home, at the clearing where her children played, at the life she and Caleb had created together. "I just want to remember this moment. How perfect it is. How grateful I am." Caleb leaned down and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Every moment with you is perfect," he said. "Every single one." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Sarah and Caleb remained there for a few more heartbeats, wrapped in each other and in the deep contentment of a love that had overcome every obstacle. Then they went inside together, Caleb pushing Sarah's chair across the threshold of the home he had built for them, into the warmth and light and laughter of their family. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of mountain life. Daniel, at 17, fell in love with a girl from town, the daughter of the minister, and began courting her with his father's blessing and his mother's advice. Jacob, at 15, received a scholarship to university in Denver, his academic excellence finally recognized beyond their mountain home. Elizabeth, now 11, was showing remarkable aptitude in mathematics and science, subjects Sarah encouraged with every resource they could provide. Through it all, Sarah and Caleb remained the center around which their family orbited. They had grown older together, silver threading through Caleb's dark hair and beard, lines of laughter etching themselves around Sarah's eyes. But the love between them burned as bright as ever, perhaps brighter for having weathered so many seasons together. Sarah's leatherwork had become well known throughout the territory, and she had apprentices now, young women from town who came to learn the craft from her. She taught them not just the skills of leatherworking, but also lessons about resilience and capability, about refusing to let limitations define your worth. Caleb had expanded his carpentry business as well, taking on a partner to help with the larger projects. But he always saved time for special builds, particularly for people like Sarah who needed custom solutions to accessibility challenges. He had become something of an expert in adaptive furniture and mobility aids, his engineering background combining with his practical experience to create innovations that helped dozens of people throughout Colorado. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party, inviting friends and family from miles around. Margaret and Thomas came with their 5 children, now ranging from toddlers to young adults. Neighbors from the surrounding homesteads appeared, along with many of the people Caleb had helped over the years with his custom builds. "I can't believe you all kept this secret," Sarah said, laughing as she looked around at the crowded cabin. "It wasn't easy," Elizabeth admitted. "Papa almost figured it out twice." The celebration lasted into the evening, with music and dancing and enough food to feed everyone twice over. Sarah watched Caleb dance with Elizabeth, his daughter's feet balanced on his boots as he waltzed her around the room, and felt her eyes mist with tears. This life, this beautiful, full, rich life, had seemed impossible 20 years ago when she was broken and bitter in a poorly built wheelchair. But here it was, real and solid, and hers. Later that night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Caleb carried Sarah out to the porch. The stars blazed overhead in the clear mountain air, and the night was warm with the promise of summer. 20 years, Caleb said softly. "It feels like a lifetime and like no time at all." "I know what you mean," Sarah said, nestled comfortably against his chest. "Sometimes I can barely remember my life before you. Other times, I remember every moment since we met with perfect clarity." "Any regrets?" Caleb asked. "Not a single one. You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner," Caleb said. "Think of all the years we could have had together." "We have exactly the years we were meant to have," Sarah said, "and we've made the most of every single one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest, feeling the peace of their mountain home settling around them like a blanket. "I built you a new wagon," Caleb said eventually. Sarah laughed. "You built me a wagon 20 years ago. That's how this all started." "I know, but that was a wheelchair wagon. This is different. It's a traveling wagon, fully outfitted for long trips. I thought maybe, once Jacob goes off to university and Daniel gets married, we might want to do some exploring. See more of the country, show Elizabeth the ocean, maybe." Sarah pulled back to look at him, seeing the earnest hope in his eyes. "You want to travel? You, the man who came to the mountains to be alone?" "I came to the mountains to hide," Caleb corrected, "but you taught me how to live again. And I don't want to spend our later years wishing we had seen more, done more. I want to share adventures with you, Sarah. I want to show you the world." "Then let's do it," Sarah said immediately. "Let's see everything we can while we're still young enough to enjoy it." Caleb's face broke into a wide smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." The following years brought changes and continuity in equal measure. Daniel married his minister's daughter in a beautiful ceremony, and within a year, Sarah and Caleb became grandparents to a healthy baby girl. Jacob excelled at university, eventually pursuing medicine with the goal of becoming a doctor who specialized in helping patients with mobility challenges. Elizabeth, as she grew into young womanhood, proved to be as determined and capable as her mother, declaring her intention to become an engineer and design better mobility aids than anything currently available. True to their word, Sarah and Caleb began taking extended trips, exploring the West in the specially designed wagon Caleb had built. They saw the Pacific Ocean, visited the great forests of the Northwest, traveled to San Francisco, and watched ships coming into the harbor. Everywhere they went, people were amazed by the wagon and the obvious love between the couple traveling in it. "How long have you been married?" a woman asked them in Oregon. 23 years, Caleb said proudly. "You still look at each other like newlyweds," the woman observed. "That's because I still feel like a newlywed," Caleb said, reaching over to take Sarah's hand. "Every day with her is a gift." They returned home between trips, always drawn back to their cabin in the Colorado mountains. Their children and growing number of grandchildren would visit, filling the house with noise and chaos and love. Sarah would sit in her chair, now one of several that Caleb had built over the years as her needs changed, and watch her family with profound satisfaction. On the evening of their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered once again. Daniel was there with his wife and 3 children. Jacob had brought his fiancée, a fellow medical student. Elizabeth, now 19, was preparing to leave for college back east, one of the first women admitted to the engineering program there. After dinner, Daniel stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us that love isn't about perfect circumstances or ideal situations. It's about choosing each other every day, about building a life together through determination and creativity and unwavering commitment. Papa, you showed me what it means to be a husband and father. Mama, you showed me that strength has nothing to do with physical ability and everything to do with character and heart. We love you both more than words can say." There wasn't a dry eye in the room when he finished. Caleb pulled Sarah close, kissing her temple as their family applauded and cheered. Later that night, alone in their bedroom, Caleb helped Sarah prepare for bed with the practiced ease of 25 years of partnership. He had long since stopped seeing her paralysis as something to overcome or work around. It was simply part of who she was, like the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. "Daniel's toast was lovely," Sarah said as Caleb lifted her into bed. "It was," Caleb agreed, settling in beside her and pulling her into his arms. "But he got one thing wrong." "What's that?" "He said love is about choosing each other every day. But with you, there's no choice involved. I couldn't not choose you if I tried. You're as essential to me as breathing." Sarah turned in his arms to face him, studying the face she had loved for a quarter century. His hair was more silver than dark now, and lines creased his forehead and crinkled around his eyes. But to her, he was just as handsome as the day they met, perhaps more so for all the years and experiences etched into his features. "I love you, Caleb Stone," she said. "I loved you when you built me that first wagon. I loved you when you asked me to marry you. I loved you when you held our babies for the first time. I love you more now than I ever have, and I'll love you even more tomorrow." "That's good," Caleb said, his voice husky with emotion, "because I intend to give you a lot of tomorrows." As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms as they had been for 25 years, Sarah reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. That stagecoach accident in 1876 had seemed like the end of everything, but it had actually been the beginning, the hard and painful beginning of a journey that had led her to love, to family, to a life richer than anything she could have imagined in her youth. The years continued to pass with gentle grace. Caleb and Sarah grew older together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts remaining sharp and true. They traveled less as age caught up with them, content to remain in their mountain home, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Caleb continued to build, his hands still steady and sure even in his 70s. He created toys for the great-grandchildren, furniture for the growing family, and still the occasional custom wheelchair or mobility aid for someone in need. Sarah's leatherwork business had been passed on to one of her apprentices, But she still made special items for family, each piece a work of art born from decades of practice. On their 40th wedding anniversary, too old now for big celebrations, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The mountains were unchanged, eternal and beautiful, standing watch over the cabin and the life that had unfolded there. 40 years, Sarah marveled. How is it possible we've been married 40 years? Because we were smart enough to find each other when we were young, Caleb said, and stubborn enough to build something that lasted. Do you remember what you said to me the day we met? Sarah asked. You said you knew what it was like to feel trapped in a body that wouldn't do what you needed it to do. I remember. I don't think I really understood what you meant at the time, but I understand now. You were trapped by grief and trauma and isolation, and I was trapped by my paralysis and my belief that I was broken. We freed each other, didn't we? We did, Caleb agreed. You gave me a reason to come back to the world, and I hope I gave you the tools and support to live fully in it. You gave me everything, Sarah said simply. A home, a family, a life beyond my wildest dreams. You gave me love when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me dignity when the world tried to take it away. You gave me 40 years of happiness, Caleb. How can I ever thank you for that? By giving me the same, Caleb said, taking her hand in his, which you have every single day. I was a broken man living alone in the mountains, Sarah. You made me whole again. You gave me purpose and joy, and a family I treasure more than anything. If I've given you even a fraction of what you've given me, then I'm satisfied. They sat in peaceful silence as the sun set over the mountains one more time, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Inside the cabin, they could hear their latest great-grandchild, a baby girl born just last month, crying softly before being soothed by her mother. It was the sound of life continuing, of the legacy they had built together. I'm tired, Sarah admitted, more tired than I've been in a long time. Then let's go to bed, Caleb said, standing and moving to push her chair inside, but Sarah stopped him with a hand on his arm. In a moment, I just want to stay here a little longer, with you, watching our mountains. So Caleb settled back into his chair, their hands linked between them, and they watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The night wrapped around them like a blessing, and Sarah felt a peace so profound it was almost transcendent. She had thought all those years ago that no man could love a paralyzed woman, but Caleb had proved her wrong in every possible way. He had loved her completely, fiercely, tenderly for 40 years. He had built her wagons and wheelchairs, but more importantly, he had built her a life. He had given her dignity and purpose and partnership. He had made her feel beautiful and capable and cherished every single day. And she had done the same for him, she realized. She had healed his war-torn heart, brought him back from isolation, given him children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to love. Together, they had created something remarkable out of what could have been tragedy. I would do it all again, Sarah said suddenly. If I had the chance to go back and change the accident, to have my legs back, but lose this life with you, I wouldn't do it. I would choose this, choose you, every single time. Caleb's grip on her hand tightened. That's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me. It's the truth. This life, our life, it's been everything I needed, everything I wanted. You were everything I needed and wanted, even though I didn't know it until you walked into that general store and looked at me like I mattered. You did matter. You do matter. You always will. They sat together under the stars for another hour, talking quietly about memories and children and all the blessings they had shared. When they finally went inside, Caleb carried Sarah to bed, as he had done countless times over the decades, holding her close and whispering his love into her hair. That night, Sarah Stone fell asleep in the arms of the man who had loved her for 40 years, the mountain man who had built her a custom wagon and in doing so had built her a life. She dreamed of mountains and starlight, of children's laughter and the steady comfort of Caleb's presence. She dreamed of all the years behind them and all the love that had filled those years to overflowing. And when she woke in the morning, Caleb was still there beside her, just as he had been every morning for 4 decades, ready to face another day together. They had breakfast with their great-grandchildren, watched the sun climb over the mountain peaks, and settled into the comfortable rhythms of a love that had stood the test of time. The story of Sarah and Caleb Stone became something of a legend in that part of Colorado. People would tell it to their children and grandchildren, the tale of the paralyzed woman and the mountain man who loved her, who proved that disability was no barrier to a full and beautiful life. They spoke of the custom wagon he had built her, of the accessible cabin in the mountains, of the family they had raised and the love that had sustained them through everything. But for Sarah and Caleb themselves, there was no legend, no story. There was only their life, lived day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. There was only the enduring truth that love was not about perfection or ideal circumstances. It was about seeing someone completely, accepting them wholly, and choosing to build a life together regardless of what obstacles might stand in the way. On their 50th wedding anniversary, too frail now for anything but quiet celebration, they sat on their porch one last time, surrounded by 3 generations of descendants. Daniel gave another toast, Jacob read a poem he had written for them, and Elizabeth presented them with a plaque she had designed and built herself, a tribute to 50 years of partnership and love. But it was little James, their youngest great-grandchild, who asked the question that summed up everything. "Great-grandma," he said, climbing into Sarah's lap, "did great-grandpa really build you a wagon?" "He did," Sarah said, hugging the boy close. "The most wonderful wagon in the whole world." "Why?" James asked with a child's innocent directness. Sarah looked over at Caleb, sitting in his chair beside her, his hand reaching out as it always did to find hers. "Because he loved me," she said simply. "And when you really love someone, you find ways to show them. You build them wagons, you make their lives better, you stand beside them no matter what challenges come. That's what love is." "And I would do it again," Caleb added, his voice still strong despite his years. "I would build 1,000 wagons if that's what it took. Because she was worth it. She was always worth it." James nodded as if this made perfect sense, then scrambled down to join the other children playing in the yard. But the adults in the room sat quietly, many with tears in their eyes, recognizing the profound truth in those simple words. As the sun set on that golden anniversary day, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, Sarah and Caleb Stone sat hand in hand, watching their legacy play out before them. They had lived a remarkable life, full of love and challenge and triumph. They had proved that disability was no barrier to happiness, that love could overcome any obstacle, that 2 broken people could heal each other and build something beautiful together. And when the time came, years later, for them to leave this world, they did so as they had done everything else, together. Sarah passed first, quietly in her sleep, Caleb's hand in hers. He followed 3 days later, unable or unwilling to continue without his beloved wife beside him. They were buried side by side on their mountain under the pine trees they had loved, with a headstone that read simply, "Sarah and Caleb Stone. They built a life together. They loved completely. They proved that anything is possible." And in the years that followed, their descendants would bring their own children to that peaceful grave to tell the story of the paralyzed woman and the mountain man, of the custom wagon and the enduring love, of the life that had seemed impossible but became more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. It was a story of hope and resilience, of seeing beyond limitations to possibilities, of love that conquered all. It was the story of Sarah and Caleb Stone, and it was a story that would never be forgotten.